At parent-teacher conferences, my teacher asked my mom, "Aren't you on the hub?" "Excuse me?" My mom's voice said loudly. Mr. Leonard's face flushed red as he realized what he'd said. "I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. I just thought I recognized you." "Show me." My mom's knuckles were white, gripping her purse. He reluctantly turned his phone toward us. My stomach dropped seeing my mom's face edited onto an explicit video. The username was Jason Beast 2010, Jason Fitzgerald, the kid who'd been making my life hell all year. My mom took photos of the screen with shaking hands. We left immediately and she called her lawyer from the parking lot. Within days, they'd traced it back to Jason's house. His parents begged us not to press charges, but my mom was done. "Your son made illicit content of me. He's facing consequences." The lawsuit revealed Jason had made multiple deepfake videos. During his deposition, they asked why he targeted our family specifically. Jason started crying and pointed at me. "Ask him about the note." Jason's voice cracked. "What note?" I was genuinely confused. "The one I left in your locker in February. You threw it away without reading it." He was sobbing now. I vaguely remembered finding a crumpled paper and tossing it thinking it was trash. Jason kept talking about how that was his confession, how I'd rejected him, how he'd wanted revenge for the humiliation. The room went silent. His parents looked shocked. My mom's jaw dropped. Jason had created illegal content of my mother because I'd accidentally thrown away what was apparently a love note. "You did this because of a crush?" My mom's voice was ice. Jason's lawyer tried to stop him, but he kept going. Explained how he'd learned deepfakes online, how he'd spread them hoping to hurt me like I'd hurt him, how he'd planned to comfort me after and win me over. The judge ruled completely in our favor. Jason got probation and had to register as a sex offender. His family lost everything, paying damages and legal fees. We had to move across the state to escape what he'd done. My mom never recovered. She quit her job and barely left the house. The videos had spread too far to contain. Jason had destroyed her life over a middle school crush I never knew existed. "Videos like this ruined my marriage to your father. His addiction chose pixels over family, and now that boy turned me into pixels to punish you." I'd never known that about Dad. That illicit addiction was why Mom kicked him out. Now Jason had weaponized the same thing that destroyed my parents' marriage to destroy us again. We settled into our new town trying to forget. New school where nobody knew, where the videos hadn't reached, where we could pretend to be normal. But I found Jason's note. My hands trembled as I opened it. Jason's handwriting from February. But this wasn't a love confession. It was a warning. "Your mom is really pretty. I found her Facebook. Did you know there are websites that can put anyone's face on anything? Just wanted you to know in case you ever make me mad. We should hang out more." Jason quote. My blood went cold. This wasn't a crush revealed too late. This was a threat from the very beginning. Jason had been planning this for months before I'd ever rejected him. The whole sob story about unrequited love was a lie. I looked at the date on the note. February 3rd. I checked my phone's calendar. The first deepfake was posted February 5th, 2 days after he'd warned me. But I'd never gotten the warning because I'd thrown it away unread. My hands shook as I realized what this meant. Jason had created those videos right after leaving the note, before any rejection, before any hurt feelings. He'd done it just because he could. The crush story was fabricated to gain sympathy in court. I stared at the note trying to decide what to do. The case was closed. Jason was already sentenced. Showing this now would just reopen wounds that were barely starting to heal, but it also meant everything he'd said in court was a lie. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. My heart stopped when I opened the message. "Found your new address. Your mom still looks pretty, everyone wants to see more of her." I stared at those words until they burned into my brain, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped the phone. The original note from February sat on my desk next to me, proof that Jason's whole sob story in court was a lie from the start. My thumb moved on its own, taking screenshot after screenshot. Then I forwarded everything to my email and cloud storage, making sure I had copies everywhere. The room felt too small and my chest got tight as I sat there in the dark, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to protect Mom from this, to handle it myself somehow, but I knew keeping secrets would only make things worse when she found out. I grabbed my phone again and scrolled through my apps, checking each one until I found it. Instagram. Location services were on. My stomach dropped as I looked at the last photo I'd posted 2 weeks ago at the local coffee shop, the location tag clear as day. This was my fault. Jason found us because I was careless, because I forgot to turn off one stupid setting on an app I barely even used anymore. My fingers moved fast, texting our lawyer's number even though it was past midnight, hoping maybe someone would answer. The auto reply came back immediately telling me to contact police for any urgent threats or safety concerns. I sat there for another minute, the weight of having to go through all of this again pressing down on me. Then I got up and walked to Mom's room. She was sleeping with her door cracked open like always now, a habit she'd developed since everything happened. I knocked soft at first, then louder when she didn't wake up. "Mom, I need to show you something." She sat up fast, already alert, already worried. I handed her my phone with the message still on screen, then gave her the February note I'd found. Her face went white as she read both, her hands starting to shake just like mine had. She didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there staring at the papers. Then she squared her shoulders and looked at me with this hard look I'd never seen before. "Get the house phone. We're calling the police right now." We sat at the kitchen table while Mom dialed the non-emergency line, explaining everything to the officer who answered. He told us to save all the evidence, not to delete anything, and definitely not to respond to the message. He said he'd file a report, and someone would follow up with us in the morning. There was something good about having it on record, about someone official knowing what was happening. Mom hung up, and we just looked at each other for a second before she opened her laptop. "We're locking everything down, right now." We spent the next hour going through every social media account we had, changing passwords, turning off location services, making everything private. Mom deleted her old Facebook completely, and I watched her face as years of photos and memories disappeared with one click. "Those don't matter anymore," she said, but I could tell it hurt. We made new email addresses, changed our usernames on everything, removed any photos that showed our new house or neighborhood. By the time we finished, it was almost 3 in the morning, and we were both exhausted but too wired to sleep. The next morning came too fast. I dragged myself to the school, but everything felt different now. I found myself scanning the hallways, memorizing where all the emergency exits were, checking where the security cameras pointed. Every person who looked at me too long made my skin crawl. I counted the steps from my locker to the nearest bathroom, the nearest outside door, the main office. My math teacher must have noticed something was wrong because she pulled me aside after class. "Are you okay? You seem really anxious today." I just nodded and said I was fine, but she wasn't buying it. She wrote me a pass to the guidance office and told me to go talk to someone. I wanted to throw the pass away, but I went anyway. The guidance counselor was nice enough, asking general questions about how I was adjusting to the new school. I kept my answers vague, but I guess something showed through because she scheduled me for a follow-up appointment next week. Part of me was embarrassed about needing help, but another part was just tired of carrying all this alone. When I got home, Mom was on the phone with our old lawyer. I could hear her explaining everything that happened, and then she started writing down a name and number. "Christina Banks," she said when she hung up. "She's a cybercrime specialist here in town. Our lawyer says she's the best for this kind of thing." Mom's voice sounded stronger than it had in months, like having a plan gave her some of her fight back. We had an appointment with Christina for tomorrow afternoon. That night, neither of us slept much. I kept checking my phone, waiting for another message that didn't come. Mom made coffee at 5 in the morning, and we sat together at the kitchen table, not really talking, just being there. The fear was still there, sitting heavy in my chest, but at least we weren't facing it alone this time. At least we knew what we were dealing with now. At least we had people who could help us. The February note sat between us on the table, evidence of what Jason really was, proof that this was never about love or rejection. It was always about control, about power, about hurting us because he could. My phone buzzed again on the table and we both jumped. Another unknown number trying to send something, but I didn't open it, just took a screenshot of the notification and turned my phone face down. Mom grabbed a notebook from the kitchen drawer and started writing down phone numbers we might need. The police, our lawyer, her therapist, making a list of where we could go if things got worse. She wrote down her sister's address 3 towns over, and the hotel by the highway that took cash, her handwriting getting steadier as she filled the page with concrete steps we could take. That night I couldn't sleep, kept seeing those videos in my head even though I'd never actually watched them. Just that one glimpse on the teacher's phone, but my brain filled in the rest. The anger was starting to burn hotter than the fear, this quiet rage that made my hands clench into fists under the blanket. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and went downstairs to find the February note still on the kitchen table. I took photos of it from every angle, the envelope too if I could find it, then got a Ziploc bag from the drawer and carefully sealed the note inside without touching it more than I had to. The methodical process of documenting evidence helped calm my racing thoughts, gave me something to focus on besides the sick feeling in my stomach. Mom found me there at sunrise, still taking photos, and she sat down across from me looking exhausted. "Should we tell his probation officer about this?" she asked, but then immediately shook her head. "What if it makes him do something worse?" We went back and forth for an hour, wanting him to face consequences, but scared of pushing him to escalate, trapped between needing justice and protecting ourselves. Finally, Mom called our lawyer again, and he gave us the number for Christina Banks, said she was the best cybercrime detective in the area and could help us figure out our options. We got an appointment for a phone call that afternoon, and for the first time in days I felt like maybe someone who actually understood this stuff could help us. At the school I could barely focus, kept checking my phone for more messages, even though I'd turned off notifications. The guidance counselor must have noticed because she called me in during lunch. Ellis Marsh was younger than most of the staff, maybe 30, and he didn't push when I said I was dealing with some family stuff. "I can arrange flexibility with your attendance if you need it," he said, and I felt this huge relief that I wouldn't have to explain everything just to get help. That afternoon, Mom and I huddled around her phone on speaker while Christina Banks introduced herself, her voice calm and professional. She walked us through saving the message headers and metadata, Explained how to export our call logs without losing any data. Don't delete anything, even if you want to, she said. We need everything intact for evidence. She scheduled an in-person meeting for next week and gave us her direct cell number. If anything escalates, call me immediately. 2 days later, we got another call, this time from Roderick Payne, who introduced himself as Jason's probation officer. I received your report about a potential violation, he said, and his voice was serious, not dismissive like I'd feared. He asked detailed questions about the messages, took down the dates and times, said he'd be reviewing Jason's compliance with his no-contact order. This is a clear violation if it's him, he said. I take these things very seriously. I started to trust that maybe the system would actually work this time. Christina called back the next day with more instructions about preserving digital evidence. She explained how to save screenshots with the metadata intact, how to document the chain of custody for everything we collected. My anxiety eased a little with each concrete step she outlined, each specific action I could take instead of just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. That night, Mom and I sat at the dining room table with both our laptops, going through every setting on our Wi-Fi router, changing the password to something long and random. Her hands shook as she typed, but she didn't stop, didn't give up, and we worked through the list Christina had given us. We changed every password we had, enabled two-factor authentication on everything, removed our address from every website we could find. It took hours, but we did it together, this weird bonding experience over security settings and privacy options. The next morning at the school, Ellis checked in with me briefly. Just a quick, "How are you doing?" in the hallway that didn't draw attention. He'd arranged for my teachers to be flexible about deadlines without telling them why, just that I was dealing with something at home. The relief of not having to explain everything to everyone was huge. Roderick called again that afternoon, said he'd started investigating and found some concerning things. "There's an old tablet that wasn't on his registered device list," he said. "I'm conducting a full compliance check tomorrow." He explained that any violation could mean stricter probation terms or even jail time, and while part of me wanted Jason to face the harshest consequences possible, another part just wanted him to leave us alone. Christina met with us in person finally, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She looked at everything we'd collected, the February note, the screenshots, the call logs, nodding as she made notes. "You've done everything right," she said, and Mom actually smiled for the first time in weeks. Christina explained that she could trace the messages even if they came through anonymizing apps, that there were always digital breadcrumbs if you knew where to look. She took copies of everything and said she'd start her investigation immediately. That night I actually slept for more than 2 hours straight, still waking up a lot, but not the constant alertness I'd had before. Mom had started seeing her therapist twice a week now, and while she still wasn't leaving the house much, she was at least talking about maybe going to the grocery store next week. We kept our phones on silent after 9 p.m., this new rule we'd made to give ourselves some peace. The safety plan Mom had written was taped to the refrigerator now, and every time I saw it, I felt a little more in control, a little less helpless. The next day at the school, a girl from my history class walked up to my locker while I was getting my books. Lainey Guzman had been sitting near me all semester, but we'd never really talked before. She asked if I wanted to sit with her at lunch since I'd been eating alone in the library most days. I hesitated, but her smile seemed real, not like she was trying to get gossip or anything. We sat at a table in the corner of the cafeteria, and she talked about normal stuff like homework and this show she was watching. I kept my answers short and didn't share anything personal, but when she asked if I wanted to hang out again tomorrow, I said yes. The loneliness I'd been carrying around for months cracked just a little bit with this small, normal teenage moment. That afternoon, Christina called and asked us to forward all the threatening messages with their full headers intact. She walked me through the steps on my phone to access the metadata that most people never see. Mom sat next to me as we went through each message, saving everything to a folder Christina could access remotely. My hands weren't shaking anymore as we worked through the technical steps together. Christina explained she needed our complete phone records too, and gave us the exact format the phone company would need for the subpoena. The helpless panic I'd been feeling for days was slowly being replaced by this focused cooperation, like we were actually doing something instead of just waiting for the next bad thing. 2 days later, Roderick called with an update after reviewing Jason's probation paperwork. He confirmed there was definitely a no-contact order that specifically included any form of digital communication. His voice was serious as he explained this was a clear violation that could result in stricter probation terms or even jail time. The validation that someone was taking this seriously mixed with dread about having to go through more hearings and legal stuff. Christina had warned us that getting the subpoenas approved and gathering evidence would take time. Days turned into a week of waiting while paperwork moved through the system at its own slow pace. I wanted things to happen faster, but Christina reminded us that doing everything properly was more important than rushing. My frustration with how long everything took battled with trying to be patient about following the right procedures. Mom was looking through her old social media one evening when she found something that made her gasp. Someone had left a disgusting comment on a photo from 3 years ago on some random website we didn't even know had copied her pictures. The comment referenced the deep fakes and said horrible things about what she deserved. Mom's hands shook as she screenshot it, but this time her grief was shifting into anger, focused outward at Jason, instead of inward at herself. The next morning, our neighbor knocked on our door holding his phone. He showed us footage from his doorbell camera from last Tuesday at 2 in the morning. A car had been sitting in front of our house with its lights off for almost 20 minutes before driving away slowly. You couldn't see the driver clearly, but the make and model matched the car Jason's family owned. Fear edged into this constant state of looking over our shoulders as we realized we might be under actual physical surveillance, not just digital harassment. I called Ellis right away, and he said he'd talk to the administration about increasing security without making it obvious. By the next day, the school had arranged for someone from the office to walk near me between classes, making it look like they were just heading the same direction. The security guard started doing more frequent walks past my classrooms, too. I hated needing these visible precautions, but accepted them because staying safe was more important than my pride. Lainey and I had been eating lunch together for a few days when she showed me a funny picture she'd posted on her social media. My stomach dropped when I looked closer at the selfie she'd taken at the bus stop near school. In the window behind her, you could clearly see the reflection of our street number from the building across from the stop. She had no idea she'd basically posted our location for anyone following her account to see. The sting of thinking she might have done it on purpose hit me hard before logic kicked in, and I realized it was completely accidental. I pointed at the reflection and watched her face go white when she understood what she'd done. She immediately deleted the photo and started apologizing over and over about not being more careful. Her genuine panic and concern helped my hurt feelings move toward cautious forgiveness, as she promised to be more aware of backgrounds in her photos. She even went through her whole account looking for anything else that might give away information about where I lived or went to the school. We spent the rest of lunch with her showing me each photo before she deleted anything questionable, this weird bonding moment over digital safety. Christina called that evening with preliminary results from tracing the threatening messages. The technical details went over my head, but basically someone had used an old tablet or phone that only connected through Wi-Fi and ran everything through apps designed to hide their location. She explained how these masking apps worked and why they made tracing harder but not impossible. The uneasy clarity about Jason's methods made me realize how much planning had gone into trying to terrorize us while avoiding getting caught. Roderick called 2 days later saying he needed to check Jason's registered devices as part of routine monitoring. He went through the list with me on speaker while Mom listened from the couch. Jason's phone was accounted for, and his laptop showed normal usage patterns within the restrictions. But then Roderick paused and mentioned an old tablet that wasn't on the original inventory from when Jason was sentenced. The tablet had been in a drawer at his house, and nobody thought to log it since it seemed broken. My stomach tightened hearing this, because a broken tablet could still work on Wi-Fi for sending messages. Roderick said he'd flag this for further investigation, and hung up promising to keep us updated. That same afternoon, Mom's phone rang from a blocked number, and she made the mistake of answering it. Nobody spoke, but she could hear breathing on the other end before the line went dead. Her hands started shaking, and her breathing got fast and shallow like she couldn't get enough air. I grabbed her shoulders and helped her sit down on the kitchen floor while counting out loud for her to match my breathing. We'd watched videos about panic attacks after the first few happened and practiced this technique together. After 10 minutes, she was breathing normally again, but we both stayed on the floor holding each other. The next morning, Bridget Casey called for a phone consultation Mom had scheduled through a referral service. I could hear Mom's voice from her bedroom as she talked about what happened and why she was scared to leave the house. Bridget's voice was calm, and she didn't push Mom to commit to anything right away. They talked for 45 minutes, and Mom came out looking tired but less tense than before. She said Bridget seemed nice, and they'd scheduled another call for next week to talk about maybe doing video sessions. At the school, Ellis had arranged for me to join a support group that met during lunch on Wednesdays. I walked into the conference room expecting it to be awkward, but the other 5 kids there just nodded when I sat down. One girl was talking about how someone posted her address online after she reported harassment at her old school. Another kid mentioned getting hundreds of messages after someone shared his number in a hate group. Nobody asked me to share my story, and I just listened, feeling less alone than I had in months. That evening, I sat at my desk and started writing a victim impact statement, even though I wasn't sure when or if I'd use it. The words came out jumbled at first, but then I found a rhythm describing how this affected our daily lives. I wrote about Mom quitting her job and us having to move and the fear that followed us everywhere. Writing it down made me feel less powerless even if nobody else ever read it. Christina called the next day with news that made my hands clench into fists. She'd traced the username JasonBeast2010 to a data broker site where someone had purchased our new address 2 weeks ago. The payment came from a prepaid card, but the email used for the account had been active recently. This was proof that someone was actively stalking us, and not just making empty threats. She said this gave them enough evidence to move forward with violation proceedings. Roderick called an hour later to confirm he was filing paperwork for an expedited probation violation hearing. He explained that the evidence Christina found combined with the unregistered tablet created a pattern of concerning behavior. The hearing would happen within 2 weeks instead of the usual month-long wait. My anxiety spiked thinking about seeing Jason again, but relief washed over it, knowing something was actually being done. That night, Mom mentioned something that caught me off guard while we were eating dinner. She said Dad had texted her last week after months of no contact asking how she was doing. She hadn't responded, but seeing his name had brought back all the pain from their divorce. She looked at her plate and said she didn't want to deal with him on top of everything else happening. I squeezed her hand, and we finished eating in silence. Later that night, I pulled out the February note again and read it for the 10th time. The lie Jason told in court about having a crush kept bothering me because it changed everything about why this happened. I decided the judge needed to know the truth about Jason's premeditation, even if it meant admitting I'd kept the note secret at first. The shame of not showing it earlier didn't matter as much as making sure Jason faced consequences for what he actually did. I took photos of the note with my phone and emailed them to Christina with an explanation of when I'd found it. The next day at lunch, Lainey asked if I wanted help making my online stuff more private after I'd mentioned being worried about data brokers. We spent the whole period on her laptop going through removal request forms for different sites that sell people's information. She showed me browser extensions that block trackers and helped me change settings on apps I didn't even know were sharing my location. Each small step felt like taking back a tiny piece of control, even though we both knew nothing online ever really disappears. The next morning, Ellis pulled me into his office and spread out papers on his desk, showing a new safety protocol with my initials at the top. He'd already talked to my teachers and the security guard about keeping watch for anyone suspicious near campus. My face burned knowing more people knew about my situation now, but Ellis said it was necessary after everything that had happened. He gave me a laminated card with emergency numbers and told me to keep it in my pocket at all times. Walking home that afternoon, I checked the mailbox like always, and my hand froze on a small package with my name written in black marker. No return address and no stamps, which meant someone had put it there themselves. Inside was a USB drive with a sticky note that just said, "Watch this," and my whole body started shaking. I wanted to plug it in so bad to see what was on it, but something in my gut told me not to. I called Christina right away, and she told me to put it in a plastic bag without touching it more. She came by within an hour wearing gloves and took the USB with her. She explained how these things could have viruses that steal passwords or tracking software that shows your location. She said I did the right thing not plugging it in, and that made me feel better about resisting the urge to look. 2 days later, Christina called with news that made my skin crawl. The corner store near Jason's old neighborhood had security footage from last week, showing someone who looked just like him buying a pack of USBs with cash. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, but the height and build matched perfectly. The store clerk remembered him because he'd asked specifically for the cheapest ones they had. Christina said this was enough evidence to move forward, and Roderick would be contacting Jason's family soon. That same afternoon, Roderick left a voicemail saying he'd sent formal notification to Jason's parents and their lawyer about the probation violation hearing. He said it would happen in about 10 days, and we'd need to be ready to testify. The official papers would arrive by certified mail, and Jason would have to appear or face immediate arrest. My hands got sweaty just thinking about being in the same room as him again. Mom had been doing phone sessions with Bridget for weeks, but today was her first time going to the actual office. I waited in the car while she went inside and watched her take deep breaths before opening the door. She stayed in there for 50 minutes and came out looking tired but somehow lighter. She told me they'd set a goal for her to leave the house at least 3 times a week, even if just for short trips. It wasn't much, but seeing her try made something loosen in my chest. That evening, I finally gave Christina the original February note that I'd been keeping in my desk drawer. She took photos of it from every angle and put it in an evidence bag with the date and time written on the label. She said this would help show the pattern of threats and planning, even though it wouldn't add new charges since the case was already closed. I worried about what Jason might do if he found out I'd kept the note, but Christina said we needed everything documented. A few days passed, and we got word that Jason's lawyer had filed a motion to exclude the note from the hearing since it wasn't part of the original case. The judge reviewed it and decided to allow it as context for understanding the harassment pattern, even though it couldn't change the existing verdict. Christina said this was still a win because it showed premeditation and would matter for the probation violation. That night, Lainey came over to work on homework and noticed I kept bouncing my leg and cracking my knuckles. She asked if I was okay, and I told her about the hearing coming up. She showed me this breathing thing where you breathe in for 4 counts and hold it for 4 and then out for 4. We practiced it together for a few minutes, and she said her therapist taught it to her for panic attacks. Before she left, she made me promise to do it every night before bed, and honestly, it did help me fall asleep easier. The day before the hearing, Christina and Roderick came to our house to go over what would happen. They sat at our kitchen table and walked through the whole process step by step. Roderick would present the evidence first, and then Christina would explain the technical stuff about the messages and USB. They'd probably call me to testify about finding the USB and receiving the threats. Christina said to just tell the truth and not to look at Jason if it made me nervous. They practiced questions with me like whether I'd had any contact with him and if the threats had affected my daily life. Mom sat next to me the whole time, squeezing my hand when my voice shook. By the time they left, I felt ready, even though my stomach was in knots. The morning of the hearing, I threw up twice before we even left the house. Mom held my hair back and rubbed my shoulder while I gripped the toilet seat. The courthouse was 40 minutes away, and we drove in silence except for the GPS giving directions. I kept checking my phone to see if Christina or Roderick had sent any updates, but there was nothing. The parking lot was half empty when we pulled in, and I saw Jason's parents' blue minivan already there near the entrance. My legs felt weak walking up the concrete steps and through the metal detectors. Christina met us in the lobby holding a folder thick with printed screenshots and evidence logs. She walked us to the small hearing room where Roderick was already sitting at a table reviewing his notes. Jason sat at another table with his parents and their lawyer, his shoulders hunched forward and his hair grown out longer than I remembered. His mom kept touching his arm and whispering something, while his dad stared straight ahead at the wall. When Jason turned slightly, I saw how much weight he'd lost and the dark circles under his eyes. Part of me felt sorry for him for about 2 seconds before I remembered the USB in our mailbox and the texts threatening more videos. The judge came in, and we all stood up until she told us to sit. Roderick went first, explaining the terms of Jason's probation and the no-contact order that included any form of communication. Christina opened her laptop and connected it to the courtroom screen, showing the threatening messages with the metadata proving they came from a device using the same IP range as Jason's neighborhood. She clicked through screenshots of the USB analysis, showing it contained tracking malware designed to report our location if we'd plugged it in. The security footage from the store played next, grainy but clear enough to see someone Jason's height buying USBs with cash while wearing a baseball cap. Christina explained how the timeline matched up with when the USB appeared in our mailbox 2 days later. She showed the February note I'd given her, explaining it proved a pattern of threats that started before any supposed rejection. Jason's lawyer tried to argue the note wasn't relevant since it was from the original case, but the judge allowed it as context. When it was my turn to speak, my hands were shaking, so bad I had to clasp them together under the table. I told the judge about finding the USB and how scared I was to even touch it. I explained how the text made us afraid to leave the house and how Mom had panic attacks whenever the doorbell rang. My voice cracked when I described checking the locks 3 times every night and jumping whenever a car drove slowly past our house. The judge asked Jason if he wanted to say anything, and he just shook his head while tears ran down his face. His lawyer spoke for him, saying this was a momentary lapse and asking for another chance. The judge took 20 minutes to review everything before coming back with her decision. She added no internet access at all to his probation terms, not even for school unless supervised by a teacher. He had to surrender all devices within 24 hours for forensic examination. She ordered GPS monitoring with an ankle bracelet that would alert if he came within 5 miles of our address. His probation was extended another 2 years with mandatory weekly check-ins instead of monthly. Any violation would mean immediate jail time with no second chances. Jason's mom started crying when they put the ankle monitor on him right there in the courtroom. After the hearing, Christina took us to a conference room and set up victim notification on her laptop so we'd get automatic alerts about any changes to Jason's status. She gave us a printed checklist of digital safety steps, including 2-factor authentication and privacy settings for every platform. She showed us how to check if our information was being sold online and helped us file removal requests for 5 different data broker sites. Roderick came in to confirm the new restrictions were already active in the system and that Jason's devices would be collected that afternoon. Back at the school the next week, Ellis called me to his office to go over new accommodations they'd put in place. The main office staff had my photo, and Mom's with a note to call him immediately if anyone asked about us. Teachers got an email saying I might need to step out of class without explanation and to mark me present anyway. Security had a photo of Jason to watch for even though he lived 3 hours away now. Ellis gave me a hall pass that let me go to his office anytime I felt unsafe without needing permission. He set up weekly check-ins where we'd just talk for 15 minutes about how things were going. Lainey asked me to join her science fair group project about water filtration, which meant staying after school twice a week in the library. Working on something normal with a clear goal and deadline helped my brain focus on something besides checking doors and windows. She never asked about the hearing or why I'd been absent, but she always saved me a seat at lunch and texted me funny videos at night. Mom managed to drive herself to the grocery store for the first time since we'd moved, staying inside for 30 minutes before the anxiety got too bad. She bought milk and bread and frozen dinners. Nothing special, but when she got home, she cried happy tears while putting them away. I watched from the kitchen doorway as she crossed grocery shopping alone off the goal list Bridget had helped her write. We spent a whole Saturday going through the data broker removal process Christina had shown us, finding our names and address on 12 different sites. Each removal request took forever with different forms and verification steps, but we celebrated with ice cream when the confirmations started coming through. Some sites removed us within hours, while others said it could take 30 days, but at least we were doing something active to protect ourselves. That night, Dad texted me directly for the first time since the divorce, asking if I was okay and saying he'd heard about what happened. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before typing back that I wasn't ready to talk, but would let him know when I was. He replied immediately saying he understood and would wait however long it took. I deleted the conversation, but felt better about setting that boundary instead of just ignoring him or saying something angry I'd regret later. 3 days later, Mom surprised me by opening her laptop at the kitchen table and pulling up a job listing. Her hands shook a little as she typed in her information for a remote admin position she'd found. The company needed someone to handle basic data entry and scheduling from home. She could set her own hours around her therapy appointments with Bridget. I watched her fill out the application slowly and carefully. She hit submit and then immediately closed the laptop like it might bite her. 2 days later, they called for a phone interview. I sat with her while she answered their questions in a steady voice. They offered her the job on the spot starting the following Monday. She cried after hanging up, but it was the good kind of tears. Meanwhile, at the school, Lainey caught me after chemistry class with an idea. The school paper was doing a special issue on internet safety, and she thought we should write something together. We spent lunch periods in the library working on an anonymous piece about digital privacy. She helped me turn my anger into something useful without having to put my name on it. We wrote about data brokers and how easy it is to buy someone's personal information online. The editor loved it and said it would run next week without any bylines. Christina called that afternoon to officially close the active investigation, since Jason was already facing consequences for the probation violation. She gave us her direct cell number and told us to call immediately if anything new happened. She also sent over updated privacy guides and removal request templates for more data broker sites. Mom and I spent that evening writing out our new household rules on index cards. We made a list of crisis signals we could use if either of us felt unsafe or triggered. 3 knocks on the bedroom door meant checking in was needed. Leaving the porch light on during the day meant having a bad anxiety day. We taped the cards to the refrigerator where we'd both see them every day. The next morning, I finally deleted all the screenshots and evidence from my phone. Christina had confirmed the police had everything backed up on their servers. My phone felt lighter somehow, even though the files barely took up any space. Mom watched me empty the trash folder permanently and squeezed my shoulder. Saturday morning, Mom suggested we try the farmer's market downtown. We'd driven past it a few times, but never stopped. I could tell she was nervous from how she kept checking her phone battery. We parked close to the entrance so we could leave quickly if needed. The market was crowded, but not overwhelming. Mom bought tomatoes from an older woman who complimented her earrings. I got us both lemonade from a stand run by some kids fundraising for their soccer team. We stayed for almost an hour walking between the booths. Nobody recognized us or said anything weird. Mom even smiled at a baby in a stroller. On the drive home, she rolled the windows down and let the wind mess up her hair. Ellis called me into his office Monday to tell me something he'd heard through official channels. Jason had started his mandatory therapy groups as part of his extended probation requirements. He was attending twice a week at a facility near his new school. Ellis said this was good progress, even if it was court-ordered. That afternoon at the grocery store, I saw Jason's mom in the cereal aisle. She looked older than I remembered from the hearing. Our eyes met for a second, and she gave me this small nod. Not friendly exactly, but not hostile either. Just acknowledgement that we were both still existing in the world. I nodded back and we went our separate ways. She was buying the same brand of cereal Jason used to eat at lunch. That night, Mom made spaghetti with the tomatoes from the farmer's market. We ate at the actual dining table instead of in front of our phones like usual. She'd found this old comedy show on streaming that we used to watch together before everything happened. We put both our phones face down on silent mode. The show was dumber than I remembered, but Mom actually laughed at one of the jokes. Not a big laugh, but a real one. I realized I'd been holding my breath for months without knowing it. Sitting there with Mom eating dinner and watching TV felt almost normal. The fear was still there underneath everything. We both still jumped at unexpected noises and checked the locks multiple times. But for the first time since finding that text from Jason, the weight wasn't crushing me completely. I could take a full breath without my chest feeling tight. Mom fell asleep on the couch halfway through the second episode. I covered her with a blanket and turned the volume down low. The room felt peaceful in a way it hadn't in so long. And that's today's story wrapped up. Hopefully there's a takeaway you can use, because that's always the goal here. Subscribe and you'll never miss the next one.